If your soulmate betrayed you, don't make this mistake. Stay with me, and don't rush past this, because if you've been betrayed by someone you believed was your soulmate, your heart is standing at a very dangerous crossroads right now. Not because you're weak, but because pain has a way of convincing strong people to make choices that quietly damage them long after the betrayal itself has passed. What you do after betrayal matters more than the betrayal ever did. When it happened, it probably didn't feel real at first. There's often a strange numbness that comes before the pain fully arrives. Your mind tries to protect you by slowing everything down. You replay conversations. You search for missing pieces. You wonder how someone who felt so aligned with your soul could become the source of such deep hurt. And beneath all of that, there's a single terrifying thought you may not want to admit out loud. If I was wrong about them, what else am I wrong about? That thought shakes your sense of reality. Betrayal from a soulmate doesn't just break trust in a person. It fractures trust in your own intuition. And this is where the biggest mistake begins to form. The mistake is not forgiving too soon. The mistake is not staying too long. The mistake is not even giving another chance. The real mistake is turning against yourself. After betrayal, many people unconsciously decide that their feelings were foolish, their love was naive, and their depth was a liability. They start rewriting their own story in a way that makes them smaller, colder, and more guarded than they were before. They tell themselves they should have known better. They judge their own heart more harshly than they judge the person who betrayed them. This is where the damage deepens. Because betrayal hurts, but self-betrayal reshapes your future. You may feel an urge right now to shut down emotionally. To promise yourself you'll never love that deeply again. To harden your boundaries so tightly that nothing real can get through. That reaction feels like protection, but it isn't. It's a survival response that, if left unchecked, turns into isolation. Your depth was not the problem. Your capacity to trust was not the mistake. Your ability to love fully was not foolish. The betrayal did not happen because you loved too much. It happened because someone else did not love with the same integrity. That distinction matters more than you realize. Another mistake that quietly sneaks in after betrayal is the urge to rush clarity. You want answers immediately. You want explanations that make the pain make sense. You may find yourself obsessing over details, timelines, and motives, believing that if you understand why it happened, the hurt will dissolve. But clarity rushed is rarely clarity that heals. When you push yourself to understand, before your nervous system has stabilized, you end up intellectualizing pain instead of processing it. You start negotiating with reality. You minimize what happened. You compare your pain to others' pain. You tell yourself it wasn't that bad or that you should be over it by now. That pressure delays healing. Betrayal wounds the nervous system, not just the heart. Your body needs safety before your mind needs answers. And safety does not come from explanations, it comes from self-alignment. Another common mistake is confusing accountability with closure. You may feel that if they finally admit what they did, apologize the right way, or show enough remorse, you'll be able to move on. But closure that depends on someone who betrayed you keeps your healing in their hands. And healing cannot live there. You don't need them to fully understand your pain in order to heal. You don't need them to become a better person for you to move forward. Waiting for that keeps you emotionally tethered to the wound. The truth is uncomfortable but freeing. Some betrayals never come with satisfying explanations. Some people are unable to face the harm they caused without collapsing their self-image. And waiting for accountability from someone who lacks the capacity for it can trap you in limbo. The mistake is believing your healing requires their participation. It doesn't. Another deeply human mistake is idealizing the connection after it breaks. You remember the good moments more vividly than the painful ones. You focus on who they were instead of what they did. You convince yourself that the betrayal was an exception, not a revelation. This happens because your nervous system is craving familiarity, not truth. The bond felt safe once, and your body remembers that safety even when your mind knows it's no longer real. That doesn't mean you should return to what hurt you. It means you need to create safety within yourself again, slowly and deliberately. You are not weak for missing someone who hurt you. But you must be careful not to confuse missing with meaning. The connection mattered. The betrayal also matters. Both truths can exist without canceling each other out. One of the most damaging mistakes after betrayal is rushing into another connection to prove you're still lovable. You may want to replace the pain with attention, affection, or validation. You may want to feel chosen again as quickly as possible, not because you're ready, but because you're afraid of what the pain says about you. This doesn't heal the wound. It just covers it temporarily. Healing requires you to sit with the discomfort long enough to hear what it's asking of you. And what it's usually asking is not revenge, not reconciliation, not explanation, but self-respect. Self-respect says, I will not abandon myself to keep someone who betrayed me. I will not rewrite my worth to make their actions easier to live with. I will not rush my healing to make others comfortable. That kind of self-respect feels lonely at first. But it becomes grounding. Right now, your heart is vulnerable. And vulnerability does not mean openness to harm, it means honesty with yourself. It means acknowledging that something real broke, and pretending otherwise will not protect you. The mistake is trying to return to who you were before the betrayal. You cannot unlearn what you now know. But you can choose who you become because of it. This part of your life is not asking you to become colder. It's asking you to become clearer. Clearer about boundaries. Clearer about what you will and will not tolerate. Clearer about the difference between love and attachment. Your soulmate betraying you does not mean you were wrong about love. It means you encountered a lesson about alignment, capacity, and integrity that will shape you if you let it. Pain is not the enemy here. Avoidance is. If you avoid feeling this fully, it will leak into future connections as distrust, hypervigilance, or emotional withdrawal. If you face it with compassion for yourself, it becomes wisdom instead of armor. This is only the beginning of what needs to be understood. Because the next mistake people make after betrayal is even more subtle. And even more dangerous. And that's what we need to talk about next. Stay with me, because this second part is where the danger becomes quieter and far more personal. This is the stage most people never talk about, not because it's rare, but because it's uncomfortable to admit. The betrayal already happened. The shock has settled. The questions are still there, but now something else has crept in beneath the surface, a slow reshaping of how you see yourself, love, and reality itself. And if you're not careful here, this is where the betrayal keeps happening long after the person is gone. After the initial pain, many people slip into a phase that feels like strength but is actually self-abandonment disguised as control. You start telling yourself you're fine. You function. You show up. You even smile. You might say things like, "I've learned my lesson," or "I'm stronger now." And in some ways, that's true. But underneath, there's often a quiet rigidity forming. A tightening around the heart that says, "Never again." This is the mistake that's hardest to recognize. You begin to equate emotional distance with wisdom. You mistake numbness for peace. You convince yourself that needing less is the same as being healed. And slowly, without realizing it, you start living in a smaller emotional range than you once did. You don't dream as freely. You don't open as deeply. You don't risk being fully seen. It feels safe. But it's not freedom. Betrayal teaches your nervous system that closeness is dangerous. So it adapts. It becomes alert. Watchful. Controlled. You may find yourself scanning for signs of dishonesty even in safe interactions. Reading between lines that don't need decoding. Preparing for abandonment before it even becomes a possibility. This hyper-awareness feels like intelligence. But it's trauma trying to protect you. The mistake here is letting that protection become your personality. When that happens, you don't just protect yourself from being hurt again, you protect yourself from being deeply loved again. And the cost of that is subtle but devastating over time. Another mistake that often follows is redefining love in a way that lowers the bar rather than raises it. You may tell yourself you're being realistic now. You may accept less emotional availability because at least it's predictable. You may tolerate inconsistency because it doesn't shock you the way betrayal did. You may even start believing that passion and loyalty rarely coexist, so asking for both is naive. That belief is not wisdom. It's pain negotiating its terms. Betrayal can make you distrust intensity, but it can also make you settle for emotional dryness just to avoid chaos. And neither extreme is where real love lives. Real love is not constant anxiety. But it is not emotional starvation either. Another deeply human mistake is using forgiveness as a way to bypass anger. You may tell yourself you've forgiven them because you don't want to carry resentment. You may rush into compassion because you don't want to feel bitter. But forgiveness that comes before anger has been honored is not healing, it's suppression. Anger is not the enemy. Unexpressed anger turns inward. If you don't allow yourself to fully feel how wrong the betrayal was, how deeply it hurt, how much it violated your trust, that anger doesn't disappear. It becomes self-criticism. It becomes chronic doubt. It becomes a voice that questions your worth in quiet moments. Forgiveness is not about absolving them. It's about freeing yourself. And freedom requires truth before peace. Another mistake that often hides in this phase is romanticizing your endurance. You may look back and feel proud of how much you tolerated, how long you stayed, how deeply you loved despite being hurt. And while resilience is real, endurance is not always a virtue. Endurance without boundaries teaches others how to mistreat you. And teaching yourself that you can survive betrayal does not mean you should ever accept it again. There is also a temptation to rewrite the betrayal into a lesson too quickly. To say things like, "Everything happens for a reason," or, "It made me who I am today," before you've actually metabolized the pain. This spiritual bypassing feels comforting, but it skips an essential step. Pain becomes wisdom only after it's been felt fully. Otherwise, it becomes philosophy layered over an open wound. You don't need to rush meaning. Meaning will come when your body feels safe again. Another mistake is allowing betrayal to define your standards in reverse. Instead of asking, "What kind of love do I truly want now?" you ask, "What kind of pain am I willing to tolerate?" That shift is subtle, but it changes everything. You stop choosing based on alignment and start choosing based on survivability. You deserve more than what you can survive. You deserve what allows you to thrive. And finally, one of the most overlooked mistakes is staying emotionally tied to the version of them you loved rather than the reality of what happened. You may defend them in your mind. Explain their behavior. Contextualize their choices. You may keep holding space for who they could be instead of acknowledging who they were with you. Understanding someone does not require you to minimize your own pain. Empathy does not require self-sacrifice. You can understand their wounds and still walk away from the damage they caused. This phase of healing is about recalibration, not retreat. It's about learning to trust yourself again. Not by becoming guarded, but by becoming discerning. Discernment is different from fear. Fear closes you. Discernment clarifies you. You don't need to build walls. You need to build alignment. Alignment with your values. Alignment with your boundaries. Alignment with the kind of love that doesn't require you to abandon yourself to keep it alive. Your soulmate betraying you does not mean soul-level love is dangerous. It means not everyone who feels deep is capable of acting with integrity. That difference matters more than chemistry ever will. This part of your journey is not about returning to who you were before the betrayal. That version of you didn't yet know what you know now. This is about becoming someone who can love deeply and protect themselves without shutting down. That balance is the real healing. And it takes time. It takes patience with your own process. It takes compassion for your nervous system. It takes honesty about what hurt and why. You are not behind because you're still processing this. You're not weak because it still affects you. You're doing something far more difficult than pretending to be okay. You're rebuilding trust from the inside out. And that is the only kind of trust that lasts. There is one more layer to this, one final mistake that often appears when you start to feel better, when life begins to stabilize again. It feels harmless. It even feels logical. But if you're not careful, it quietly determines the kind of love you allow next. That's what we need to talk about next. Stay with me here, because this third part is where everything becomes deceptively quiet, and that's exactly why it matters so much. This is the phase where the pain is no longer screaming, where the tears may have slowed, where life looks almost normal again from the outside. And yet, this is the phase that silently decides what kind of love you will allow into your future. After betrayal, once the shock dulls and the sharp grief softens, many people believe the hardest part is over. You're functioning again. You're sleeping a little better. You can go hours, sometimes days, without thinking about what happened. Friends may say, "You seem better now." And in some ways, you are. But healing doesn't end when the pain becomes manageable. It ends when your inner beliefs about love, safety, and worth are rebuilt consciously, not accidentally. This is where the next mistake quietly forms. You start trusting again, but not in the right direction. Instead of trusting your intuition, you begin trusting patterns. Patterns of inconsistency you already know how to survive. Emotional distances that feel familiar. People who don't fully show up but don't fully disappear either. Because after betrayal, predictability feels safer than possibility. Your nervous system isn't asking, "Is this healthy?" It's asking, "Is this familiar?" And familiarity can be dangerous when it's built on pain. You may find yourself drawn to people who give mixed signals, who keep one foot in and one foot out, who are emotionally complex but not emotionally available. Not because you want chaos, but because your system learned that love and uncertainty arrive together. So certainty now feels suspicious. Calm feels boring. Consistency feels unreal. This is not a character flaw. It's conditioning. And if you don't become aware of it, you can repeat betrayal without anyone actually betraying you. Simply by choosing people who cannot meet you. Another mistake that often appears in this phase is overvaluing independence. You may pride yourself on needing no one now. On being self-sufficient. On not relying emotionally on anyone. And yes, independence is important. But when independence becomes armor instead of balance, it blocks intimacy. You may tell yourself, "I don't need anyone," when what you really mean is, "I don't want to be hurt again." That difference matters. You were never meant to heal by becoming emotionally isolated. You were meant to heal by learning how to connect without losing yourself. And those are very different outcomes. There's also a subtle form of self-punishment that can show up here. You may believe, without consciously realizing it, that wanting deep love again is risky or irresponsible. That being cautious is wise, but hoping is naive. So you limit yourself. You keep expectations low. You tell yourself that disappointment hurts less when you don't want much. But a small life does not protect you from pain. It just limits joy. Another mistake in this stage is mislabeling peace as boredom. After betrayal, your body became accustomed to emotional highs and lows, the tension, the doubt, the reconciliation cycles. When those are gone, calm can feel unfamiliar. And unfamiliar can feel empty. You may start questioning connections that are actually healthy because they don't activate anxiety. You may feel restless around someone who is consistent, transparent, and emotionally present. Not because something is missing, but because your nervous system hasn't recalibrated yet. Healing requires relearning what safety feels like. And safety often feels quiet at first. There is also the temptation to test people unconsciously. You may withhold a little to see if they chase. You may stay vague to see if they lean in. You may delay vulnerability to see if they remain. These behaviors aren't manipulative, they're protective. But if they become patterns, they prevent real connection. Real connection doesn't survive tests. It survives honesty. Another mistake that often hides here is intellectualizing love. You analyze compatibility, attachment styles, communication frameworks, relationship theories, all valuable tools. But if you stay in your head too long, you may avoid feeling altogether. You turn love into a concept instead of an experience. Understanding is helpful. Avoidance dressed as understanding is not. You don't heal betrayal by mastering relationship language. You heal it by learning how to stay present in connection without abandoning your boundaries. And perhaps the most dangerous mistake at this stage is believing that because you're stronger now, betrayal couldn't happen again. Strength doesn't make you immune to pain. Awareness doesn't guarantee safety. What protects you is not control, it's alignment. Alignment between words and actions. Alignment between how someone feels and how they behave. Alignment between what you want and what you accept. That's the skill you're developing now. This phase is asking you to be intentional. To choose slowly. To listen to your body. To notice when something feels off without explaining it away. To trust yourself not by closing down, but by staying awake. You are not meant to love less after betrayal. You are meant to love more wisely. Wisdom does not dull your heart. It sharpens your discernment. And discernment is what allows you to recognize when something is safe without needing to be perfect. You may still have moments where fear rises unexpectedly. Where vulnerability feels exposed. Where trust feels fragile. That doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're healing in real time. Healing is not linear. It spirals. You revisit lessons from higher ground each time. And right now, you're standing at a point where you can choose consciously who you become after betrayal, not by default, not by reaction, but by intention. You can choose not to punish yourself with loneliness. You can choose not to settle for familiarity over truth. You can choose not to carry someone else's lack of integrity into your future. Your soulmate betraying you was not the end of your capacity to love. It was the beginning of your capacity to choose better. And that capacity, once developed, becomes the quiet filter that protects you without closing you. There is one final shift left, one final realization that ties all of this together. It doesn't come with drama or certainty. It comes with calm confidence. That's what we need to talk about next. Stay with me here, because this fourth part is where everything you've been learning finally starts to settle into your bones. This is no longer about reacting to betrayal, avoiding pain, or trying to protect yourself from ever being hurt again. This is about integration. About how you carry what happened without letting it define you. And this is the stage that quietly determines whether betrayal becomes a wound you orbit forever. Or a turning point that strengthens your life in ways you didn't expect. At this point, you may notice that you're no longer consumed by what they did. The sharp edge of the betrayal has softened. The obsessive questions have slowed. You don't replay every detail anymore. But that doesn't mean everything is resolved. What remains now is subtler, and because it's subtle, it's easy to miss. This is the stage where you decide what meaning betrayal will have in your story. Many people unconsciously let betrayal become their identity. Not outwardly, not in obvious ways, but internally. They start seeing themselves as the one who was betrayed, and that lens quietly colors every future interaction. They become cautious in ways that feel justified. Suspicious in ways that feel smart. Reserved in ways that feel mature. And while some of that caution is healthy, there's a line where protection turns into self-limitation. The mistake here is allowing betrayal to become the central reference point of your emotional life. When that happens, you don't ask, what feels aligned for me now? You ask, what feels safest based on what hurt me before? Those are not the same question. Safety rooted in fear keeps you small. Safety rooted in self-trust allows you to expand. This is also the stage where you may start judging yourself more than you realize. You might think, I should be over this by now, or, why does this still affect me? That judgment adds a second layer of pain on top of the first. Healing doesn't happen on a schedule, and depth doesn't disappear just because time has passed. The goal is not to forget what happened. The goal is to stop organizing your life around it. Another subtle mistake at this stage is mistaking self-control for healing. You may be very good now at not reacting, not confronting, not expressing when something hurts. You may pride yourself on staying composed. But emotional control without emotional honesty creates distance inside you. You're not meant to become unshakable by becoming unfeeling. Strength is not silence. Strength is knowing when to speak, when to leave, and when to stay connected to yourself even if someone else cannot meet you. You may also notice that your standards feel clearer now, but you're unsure how to apply them without becoming rigid. This is normal. After betrayal, many people swing between extremes, either tolerating too much or cutting people off too quickly. Both come from the same place, fear of repeating the past. What you're learning now is balance. Balance means you don't ignore red flags, but you also don't see danger everywhere. You don't give blind trust, but you also don't withhold trust indefinitely. You allow people to show you who they are over time, while staying grounded in your own boundaries. This takes practice. And it requires one essential shift: trusting yourself more than you fear being hurt again. Another important realization in this phase is that closure is not something you receive, it's something you decide. You may never get the apology you deserve. You may never get full honesty. You may never understand exactly why they did what they did. Waiting for those things keeps you tied to the past. Closure happens when you say, I know enough to move forward. And moving forward doesn't mean minimizing the betrayal. It means refusing to let it keep shaping your future choices. This is also where compassion needs to be handled carefully. Compassion for them is optional. Compassion for yourself is essential. Some people rush into understanding the betrayer's wounds, fears, or limitations as a way to soften the pain. Understanding can be helpful, but not if it comes at the cost of self-respect. You can understand someone and still decide they no longer have access to you. You can forgive without reconciling. You can let go without reopening. That clarity is part of healing. At this stage, your nervous system is recalibrating. It's learning that connection doesn't automatically mean danger. That honesty doesn't always lead to abandonment. That love doesn't have to hurt to be real. This recalibration takes time, and during it, you may feel moments of doubt, moments of fear, moments where you pull back unexpectedly. Those moments are not failures. They are your system learning something new. The most important thing you can do now is remain curious instead of critical. When fear shows up, ask what it's protecting. When resistance appears, ask what it needs. When you feel yourself closing, ask whether you're responding to the present or reacting to the past. That awareness is what transforms pain into wisdom. You are no longer in survival mode. You are in rebuilding mode. And rebuilding doesn't mean returning to who you were before. It means becoming someone who carries depth with discernment. The betrayal revealed something painful, yes, but it also revealed your capacity to feel, to commit, to believe. Those qualities were never the problem. They are strengths that simply need safer ground to grow. You are not meant to live guarded forever. You are meant to live grounded. Grounded in your values. Grounded in your boundaries. Grounded in your self-trust. From this place, future love won't feel like a risk you brace yourself for. It will feel like a choice you step into with awareness. And awareness doesn't eliminate pain, but it prevents self-abandonment. This stage is quiet, but it is powerful. Because the way you integrate betrayal now determines whether it closes your heart, or refines it. And refinement is what allows you to love again without losing yourself. There is one final layer to this process, the moment when you stop defining love by what hurt you, and start defining it by what honors you. That's where we go next. Stay with me, because this final part is where everything you've been carrying quietly begins to reorganize itself into something steady and usable. This is no longer about the betrayal itself. This is about who you are becoming now that the shock has passed, the lessons have been absorbed, and the noise has finally softened enough for you to hear your own inner truth clearly. At this stage, something important has already happened inside you, even if you haven't named it yet. You've stopped centering your life around the question of why they did what they did. That question once felt urgent, almost necessary for survival. Now, it feels less powerful. Not because it was answered, but because it stopped being the right question. You've begun to realize that understanding someone else's betrayal does not automatically create peace. Peace comes from understanding yourself. You may notice that your thoughts are less reactive now. When memories surface, they don't knock the wind out of you the way they once did. They pass through with less charge. That doesn't mean you've minimized what happened. It means your nervous system no longer treats it as an ongoing threat. That shift is profound, and it's something many people never fully reach because they stay emotionally attached to the injustice. Here is a quiet truth that marks real healing. You no longer need the betrayal to make sense in order to move forward with confidence. What matters now is not what they did, but what you will no longer do to yourself because of it. You are becoming someone who understands that love is not proven by endurance. You no longer equate loyalty with self-sacrifice or patience with tolerance of pain. You see clearly now that staying true to yourself is not selfish. It is the foundation of every healthy connection you will ever have. This is where your standards quietly mature. Not in a rigid or defensive way, but in a grounded one. You're no longer asking, "Can I handle this?" You're asking, "Does this honor me?" That shift alone changes everything. It moves you out of survival mode and into self-respect. You may also notice that your empathy has changed. You are still compassionate, still able to understand others' wounds and limitations, but you no longer use empathy to excuse harm. You no longer translate someone else's pain into permission for them to hurt you. This balance is not coldness. It is emotional intelligence. Another sign that you've reached this stage is that you're no longer tempted to prove anything. You don't need to show that you're okay. You don't need to demonstrate strength through indifference. You don't need to rush into new connections to reassure yourself that you're desirable or lovable. You know it now, quietly and firmly, without needing confirmation. That knowing is not arrogance. It's integration. You've integrated the pain, the insight, and the growth into a stable sense of self. And from this place, your choices naturally change. You pause more before committing emotionally. You listen closely to your body's responses instead of overriding them. You allow connections to unfold at a pace that feels safe rather than exciting in a chaotic way. You are no longer chasing intensity. You are choosing alignment. This is also the stage where you release the fantasy that love must arrive dramatically to be meaningful. Betrayal often comes with emotional extremes, and your system became accustomed to that intensity. Now, you're learning to recognize that safety, consistency, and mutual effort are not boring, they are nourishing. At first, this kind of love may feel unfamiliar. But unfamiliar does not mean wrong. It often means healed. You may still feel cautious at times. That's normal. Healing doesn't erase memory, it changes how memory lives in you. The difference now is that caution doesn't control you. It informs you. You don't shut down at the first sign of vulnerability. You simply observe, communicate, and decide from a place of clarity. And this is perhaps the most important realization of all: betrayal did not take your ability to love deeply. It refined it. You are now capable of loving without losing yourself. Of caring without overextending. Of trusting without abandoning discernment. Those are not qualities you had to learn through theory. You earned them through experience. From this place, you no longer fear being hurt as much as you fear betraying yourself again. And that fear is healthy. It keeps you aligned with your values. It reminds you that your peace is not something to gamble with. You are not closed. You are selective. You are not hardened. You are clear. And clarity is what allows real love to recognize you when it arrives. This part of your journey is about embodiment. About living differently, not just thinking differently. About making choices that reflect who you are now, not who you were when you were trying to survive heartbreak. You are no longer defined by what broke you. You are defined by how you rebuilt. And what you're building now is something steady, honest, and sustainable. A life, and eventually a love. That does not require you to shrink, justify, or endure pain to belong. This is the end of the lesson that betrayal came to teach. Not because you forgot it, but because you've finally outgrown it. Stay with me a little longer, because this sixth part is not an extension of pain, it's the place where everything finally settles into truth you can live from. This is the part where betrayal stops being something that happened to you and becomes something you moved through. Quietly. Intentionally. With more strength than you probably ever gave yourself credit for. At this stage, you may notice something subtle but powerful. Your inner dialogue has changed. You are no longer negotiating with the past. You're no longer asking yourself what you could have done differently, or replaying moments to see where things went wrong. That voice that once tried to rewrite history has softened. In its place is a steadier voice that says, "I see it clearly now." And clarity, when it arrives naturally, doesn't shout. It grounds you. You are beginning to understand that betrayal did not destroy your sense of love, it clarified your relationship with truth. Before, you may have believed that love required tolerance at any cost, that staying proved devotion, that understanding someone else's wounds was the highest form of compassion. Now you know something deeper: love that requires you to betray your own needs is not devotion, it is erosion. This realization doesn't make you bitter. It makes you precise. You no longer confuse intensity with intimacy. You no longer mistake potential for commitment. You no longer hear promises louder than patterns. Your body recognizes alignment before your mind has to analyze it. And that kind of embodied awareness is something betrayal, painful as it was, helped build. You may notice that situations which once would have pulled you into anxiety now barely register. You don't chase explanations. You don't overextend emotionally to secure connection. You don't twist yourself into shapes that feel unnatural just to maintain closeness. When something feels off, you don't panic, you pause. That pause is power. This is the part of healing where you stop trying to protect yourself from pain and start protecting your peace. There is a difference. Protecting yourself from pain keeps you hyper-alert, guarded, always anticipating harm. Protecting your peace keeps you grounded, present, and responsive rather than reactive. One is rooted in fear. The other is rooted in self-trust. You are now living from self-trust. That doesn't mean you'll never be hurt again. It means you won't abandon yourself when discomfort appears. You won't silence your intuition to preserve connection. You won't stay where your dignity feels compromised just because leaving feels hard. That is a profound shift. You may also notice that forgiveness has changed meaning for you. It's no longer about absolving someone else or proving moral strength. Forgiveness now feels like release, releasing yourself from carrying emotional weight that no longer belongs to you. You don't need to make peace with what happened in order to move on. You only need to make peace with yourself. And you have. You have forgiven yourself for trusting deeply. You have forgiven yourself for staying as long as you did. You have forgiven yourself for not knowing what you know now. That self-forgiveness is what finally untangles you from the betrayal. Another sign that you are truly in this stage is that you no longer feel the urge to tell your story to be understood. You can share it if you choose, but you don't need validation for it anymore. You know what you lived. You know what it cost you. You know what it taught you. And that knowing doesn't need agreement to be real. This is where quiet confidence replaces emotional defense. You also begin to experience a different relationship with vulnerability. Vulnerability no longer feels like exposure without protection. It feels like choice. You choose when, where, and with whom you open. You don't spill your inner world to be seen. You offer it where it will be respected. That discernment doesn't close your heart. It keeps it intact. You are also learning something else now, something essential. You are learning that betrayal did not make you unlovable or replaceable. It revealed a mismatch in capacity. Someone else's inability to remain aligned with their values does not diminish your worth. It highlights your standards. And standards are not walls. They are guides. Guides that help you recognize when something belongs in your life and when it does not. Guides that prevent you from rationalizing behavior that costs you your self-respect. Guides that allow love to grow where it can actually thrive. This stage is not about proving strength. It's about living differently. You may notice that your future feels more open now, not because you're chasing it, but because you're not afraid of it anymore. You trust yourself to respond wisely to what comes. You trust that even if something ends, you will not be undone. That trust makes you braver than any emotional armor ever could. You are no longer trying to ensure that nothing bad ever happens again. You are confident that whatever happens, you will remain aligned with yourself. That confidence is quiet, but it is unshakable. This is also the stage where you stop defining love by how much it asks you to endure and start defining it by how much it allows you to be yourself. Love, now, looks like honesty without fear. Presence without performance. Effort without anxiety. And because your definition has changed, what you attract will change too. Not instantly. Not magically. But steadily. You will notice fewer entanglements that feel draining. Fewer connections that live in gray areas. Fewer situations that require you to question your worth. And when those situations do appear, you will recognize them quickly, not with panic, but with clarity. You are not numb. You are regulated. And regulation is what allows depth to exist without chaos. This part of the journey does not end with a dramatic moment. It ends with a calm one. A moment where you realize you are no longer carrying the betrayal with you. You learned from it. You integrated it. And now it rests behind you, not ahead of you. You didn't rush this healing. You didn't bypass it. You didn't harden yourself to survive it. You moved through it honestly. And because you did, you are now standing in a place where love does not feel like a threat, trust does not feel like a gamble, and vulnerability does not feel like weakness. You are standing in a place of alignment. And from alignment, everything meaningful in your life will grow. This is not the end of your story. It is the end of betrayal having a voice in it. And that silence, that peaceful silence, is the clearest sign that you are free.